wasn't that long ago, America, when both parties agreed that only American citizens should be able to vote in our elections and that they should be able to prove that they are, in fact, American citizens. To do otherwise was not only fraudulent, but was an attack on our franchise. That is, an attack on every legal vote. Then Bill Clinton had an idea with Motor Voter to register as many people as you could at the DMVs and elsewhere as the first chipping away of voter security. And it's never stopped. In fact, when the Democrats took over the House during the Trump presidency, H.R. 1, the very first bill they introduced, was a voting bill that would destroy every single barrier to fraud. States would not be free to have voter ID. States would not be free to clean their rolls. People could vote in precincts that are not their precincts. Every vote would count unless you could prove otherwise. Of course, they had the drop box. They had absentee ballots without signatures, without dates. It was a crime if you were to challenge somebody's vote, even if you knew for sure that they were voting illegally. So when you destroy the sanctity of the vote, you're destroying the right to vote. You've destroyed it. You've destroyed the process. The Democrats do not believe in voting. They believe in control, power, by any means, by all means. And so they will use voter suppression, voter repression, their own history, Jim Crow, segregation, poll taxes, literacy tests, that's them. Turn it on the Republicans, accuse them of that history when it is their history, and then say, when you demand voter ID and you demand that only citizens vote, obviously it's racist and obviously you're intending to threaten people so they won't vote. So the law becomes a crime, and crime becomes the law. Here's how the Hill newspaper put it today. There was a vote, literally minutes ago, on the SAVE Act, Chip Roy's bill. Safeguard America voter eligibility. The SAVE Act, House Republicans and a handful of Democrats, writes the Hill, approved a bill that seeks to expand proof of citizenship requirements to vote in federal elections and impose voter roll purge requirements on states. Legislation, formerly titled the Safeguard America Voter Eligibility Act, SAVE, cleared the chamber in a 221 to 198 vote, with only 5 Democrats voting yes. Only 5 Democrats. Goes to the Senate, where they write it's all but certain to be ignored amid opposition from Democrats. President Biden has vowed to veto the measure. Voter ID and proof of citizenship. And by the way, clean your rolls. Make sure the people on the rolls actually are citizens. They're not dead. They're not from other countries. They're not illegal aliens. Suddenly this is controversial. Suddenly to stand up and support this is racist. It's the people who are pointing the finger of racism who are the racists. You know, black people know how to vote. Other minorities know how to vote. They have identification. They're required to show identification when they get on an airplane, when they buy booze, cigarettes, a host of other things. What kind of mindset is it in a political party that wants you to believe that because you need to demonstrate that you're an American citizen and you actually have a right to vote, that is racist, that is suppression or repression? The Democrat Party is an evil party that has been sabotaging every one of our institutions, including the franchise, the vote. Illegal aliens, if they vote, they're distorting our system. If people are dead and people are voting for them, they're distorting our system. And 1,000 other connivances that connivers will think of. And why is it that the Democrat Party doesn't oppose any one of them? Instead, they say, you cannot prove, you don't have the evidence, no judge will say that fraud was committed. But as I've said now for several years, when you legalize fraud or you enshrine fraud in the electoral process, there's nothing to prove. It's the process itself that becomes the fraud. You can't prove at drop boxes that ballots are being stuffed into those boxes illegally, illegitimately. There's no camera. There's no security guard. There's nothing. Unless you happen to catch somebody with an iPhone or something. You can't prove that voter harvesting, that is counting votes after the election, that people going into mental institutions or nursing homes aren't filling out ballots for somebody else. How do you prove it? Particularly where a signature may not be required. So the Democrat Party looks at all the voting requirements that have helped this nation through difficult periods and not difficult periods to ensure that there is a real vote, a legitimate vote, and they've gone through the process to destroy every single security system that's in place. There have been interviews. People have gone into the inner city. They've interviewed black people. And they've asked them, do you have a voter identification? Yes, I do. Well, what if you were told that the reason there shouldn't be voter ID is because it'll be discriminatory, racist? And they laugh. I remember extensive interviews being done. Because it's ridiculous. Here we have a growing police state that demands numbers, that demands facial recognition, that demands driver's licenses, that demands all kinds of identification. And then all of a sudden, when it comes to voting, no, that's racist. That's discriminatory. That's unnecessary. That's bureaucratic. Every single House Democrat voted against a voter ID and against forcing states to go through their voter list to ensure that the list is kosher. Every single Democrat in the House voted against it except for 5 of them. 5 of them. And the Biden regime said if it did pass, he would veto it, which means it could never become law because you're not going to get the 2/3 override that you need in Congress. And it's going to die in the Senate anyway, they say. This is the Hill newspaper. Opponents of the bill say its core idea, establishing non-citizen voting as illegal, is redundant. And argue that its provisions will more likely lead to U.S. citizens being denied their right to vote than to preventing votes by foreign nationals. How so? If a voter ID is discriminatory, then why do we have these driver's licenses and other requirements for showing identification? Why do we have a customs service? Why do we have a border patrol? Why do we have a census? Why do you have an Internal Revenue Service? On all those forms, you have to demonstrate you are who you are. In all those interviews, you have to demonstrate you are who you say you are. You have to have your Social Security. You have to have other information. You have to have a passport. You have to have all kinds of stuff. That's what the federal government requires right now, today. And yet when you vote, it's redundant. And then they cite the Hill because they obviously agree with the Democrats. It's a radical left-wing operation anyway. One study by the Brennan Center for Justice found 30 suspected, not confirmed cases of non-citizen voting out of 23.5 million. Now, we know that's not possible. I explained last week, or was it the week before, that virtually every federal entity that a person comes in touch with, they now have voter registration forms that you can fill out if you're getting some kind of government benefit. Period. That don't require an identification. And under the radar, the Biden regime, one of his first executive orders was to direct every department and agency to do everything possible in every way to register people who come into their offices. And most of these offices cater to Democrats and would-be Democrats. That's just the way it is. Vote is 221 to 198. Only 23 majority surplus in votes. Only 23. You know, this caused me to think about Barbara Jordan. Barbara Jordan was a great congresswoman from Houston. Just a brilliant lady. She's a liberal. But she had integrity. And she loved America. And she was a black lady. And she, among others, led this investigation, this study, and issued a report on immigration in this country. Because it all gets down to immigration. This is why the border's wide open, and this is why the Democrats, all but 5, voted against voter ID. Because they want illegal aliens to vote. And it's impossible after the fact to make a determination. It's just impossible. The Center for Immigration Studies reran an op-ed that she wrote 18 years ago. She was a civil rights leader. Former congresswoman, the first African-American woman elected to Congress from the South. She was the chairwoman of the U.S. Commission on Immigration Reform. She was a great woman. And in this report, what they laid out, the proposals they laid out are common sense proposals that conservatives and Republicans have been arguing for ever since. She talked about a commitment to democratic ideals and constitutional principles. The Americanization ideal, she called it. The Americanization ideal. One person, one vote? What does that mean when we fight constantly over when and where we're allowed to vote and who gets to tabulate the results? Worse, in many precincts, citizenship is not even a prerequisite for voting. This is what she wrote. Do the French ambassador and the Bulgarian head of the International Monetary Fund get to pick the D.C. City Council too? How can we assimilate newcomers to our ideals and principles when our own children don't learn what those vague concepts are, let alone what they entail? Yes. 15 years ago. And then President admitted, I believe in American exceptionalism, just as I suspect that the Brits believe in British exceptionalism and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism, which suggests that exceptionalism is subjective and to a degree jingoistic. That was Obama. But the point is, the Democrat Party is now an American Marxist operation. They say they're protecting the vote. Just remember what I tell you over and over and over again. They're not protecting anything that is traditional, that is instrumental to this republic. Quite the opposite. They will destroy anything that is in their way. They will devour it. They will crush it. The Democrat Party is about the Democrat Party. It's about monopoly power. It has nothing to do with black people, minorities, white people, the right to vote. It's a power grab.